Good evening and welcome to our Evening Rounds podcast. My name is Dr. Anthony Hilliard, and I'm one of more than 1,000 physicians of the Faculty Medical Group. We work here at Loma Linda University Health's hospitals and affiliated clinics. The goal of our Evening Rounds podcast is to bring these physicians to life, to understand what makes them tick. You see, I have the privilege of working with them every day, but I actually don't know what's the method to their madness. What makes them who they are? What makes them great? If you like what you hear and you want to check out other episodes of our podcast, please go to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and our Evening Rounds webpage. Please click the link to subscribe. Good evening and welcome to our Evening Rounds podcast. I'm very lucky to have a co-host, Kelsey Kohler.
Thank you, Dr. Hilliard. In my role here as Executive Director of Communications for Loma Linda University Health, I get to share stories and news from some of our amazing physicians every single day. Normally, those stories focus on their clinical care and how they're able to impact so many different lives. But I've often wondered what's behind that white coat and what happens when they go home, what motivates them, and why did they choose this field?
So when we first thought of this podcast, and we were thinking, who would be a great first guest? Well, we decided to shoot for the moon and stop nothing short of getting Dr. Hart to be with us today. Dr. Hart requires little introduction, but for those who are not familiar with Loma Linda, Dr. Hart is our president of Loma Linda University Health. He's been with this organization for several decades and has held many different roles. You know, in my mind, so much of who you are is around mission. Mission here at home and mission abroad. I would like to hear a little bit about how mission has influenced who you are as a clinician, and even more importantly, who you are as a leader as president of Loma Linda University Health.
Well, that's not an easy question to answer. And where it comes from, for sure, I'm not even sure. One of my core beliefs is that the best part of education is confronting human need and putting students, putting faculty in direct contact with people with needs. That tends to impact a person, what we call teachable moments, more than any classroom could do, more than any set of notes, more than any textbook could do, is when you actually personally confront somebody in need. And so that's kind of what drives my sense of mission, both locally and globally, and why I think we've developed such a broad spectrum of services around here. All the things we do in the community are certainly our SACHS health system, clinics, but far beyond that. I mean, there's things in the high schools, with the communities, with so many different programs. And then globally, we have a rich network. We are partnered up within the Adventist Church that has enabled us to be partnered with, over 40 mission hospitals in developing countries, numerous clinics, numerous projects, and so on. One of the things I joke about with my academic colleagues, those activities are not extracurricular. Those are curricular. Mm-hmm. These are really what makes professionals. When you have that sort of confrontation in a positive sense, that's what makes professionals and kind of people that we want to produce from here. One of the things I enjoy saying to the students, who you are is more important than what you know. And that's character building. And I think that's absolutely critical for this institution.
Who you are is really, really rich. And you started out, from day one in that mission field abroad. What was that like, and what led you that direction?
It's interesting. I knew nothing about public health when I came to Loma Linda as a freshman medical student. And it was really in my freshman year, sitting in a class in Risley Hall in preventive medicine that most of my classmates had skipped, as they often do, a lightweight class, that the lecture was about the World Health Organization, global health, and all those issues. I said, wow, that's me. I'm a big picture guy. I enjoy seeing people and relating, but I like to look at systems, the process that's out there, and that kind of grabbed me. And I started working on my master's of public health while I was in medical school, and went on to then serve abroad in Tanzania, actually working for the U.S. government during that time. But I'll never regret those years, because they ground you in a certain sense of understanding of other cultures and other peoples that I find incredibly valuable even in this country.
Talk to me about AHI. You've had a very instrumental role in that organization, and talk to me about its infancy and where it's at now, and where do you see its role in the future, both internationally and particularly here at home at LLUH.
Loma Linda University from its very beginning sent people abroad. For many years, when I graduated from medicine, about 10% of every medical school class worked abroad sometime during their career, more than all of the medical schools combined. That was our thing. But about 25 years ago, as we were reviewing the strategic plan that Dr. Behrens had written for Loma Linda, part of it was Loma Linda will help strengthen the mission work and hospitals of the Adventist Church worldwide. And one of the board members, Ron Wisby, I remember very clearly sitting on the board, said, "Really, how are you going to do that?" And that launched a whole discussion. I got assigned the duty of thinking through what that would take. I was working as dean of the School of Public Health at the time. And out of that grew the concept of Adventist Health International, basically a system based here that would reach out to mission hospitals, that would try to strengthen the donor base, try to repair the equipment, try to fix the buildings, try to recruit people to go work there. Our mission network from Loma Linda and the church had largely died because of the policies that were there and the reimbursement and educational debt and so on, and that's been revived, and I'm delighted with that. We meet regularly. We're working with some 40 hospitals around the world, but the point I would make is that we are helping a lot of hospitals, but they are helping us. They're helping Loma Linda retain a commitment to mission and involvement with mission that would fundamentally change Loma Linda if we did not have that. So I'm very anxious that retains and continues, because I think it's so critical to who Loma Linda is all about.
So amazing to your legacy. Tell us a little bit about kind of what you've done here, as Dr. Hilliard puts, in our backyard with SAC. Tell us how you started that.
Well, everybody claims I started SAC. That's not true. It started while I was a medical student, but Dr. Harvey Elder, and working with Don Bauer, who was the associate pastor in the University Church at that time, responded to some medical students. Harvey Bidwell and Warren Peters were a couple of those that I remember back in those days. They were recognizing two groups of people in the community that weren't getting health care: hippies that were coming to California then in the 1960s, and migrant farm workers. And they said, let's do something for them. So they went out and found some unused buildings, literally, basement of a church and so on, and started evening clinics for those people who had no health care. That's how SAC got started. It's called Social Action Corps in those original days. And then it gradually limped along, anything that's running off of volunteers. In those days, you could collect samples, medicines from doctors' offices and pass them out. You can't do that any longer. So that's what they did. We'd go around and collect samples from doctors' offices, run evening clinics with a faculty supervising us, and provide health care to those who couldn't afford it. And that gradually limped along for many years. I went off to Africa, came back, began the Preventing Medicine Practice Group. We agreed to take on SAC clinics at that point in time and kind of nurture them. So for the first time, they had some physicians that were kind of formally behind them. And then when SAC really took off was in the early 1990s. California was going through a recession again at that point in time. The lines waiting for our evening clinics would start lining up at noon, waiting for an evening clinic to open. And so we need more space. We were in the basement of the Salvation Army Church in Redlands and a little building in Bloomington. And so Janice Craik, who worked for me then, and I started looking around and finally found Norton Air Force Base was converting to civilian use. And said, let's try to go for this. And I'll never remember going out and visit. It was still an Air Force base at the time. And as we walked through the clinic building the first time, some employee there had put on signs on all the doors: due to budget reductions and base closure, the light at the end of the tunnel has been turned off. And maybe your light is turned off, maybe ours is coming on.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so we applied for the building. It took us 2 years to get it. It's quite a long story, but that's when we converted Social Action Core to Social Action Community Health System with a 43,000 square foot clinic building there. And then, as you know, about 5-6 years ago, that became too small, and we moved ahead to build the San Bernardino campus. But again, I would emphasize those programs provide great service to the community, but they also provide great service for us, because I'm particularly proud of San Bernardino. I've got faculty, I've got residents in their specialty training, I've got professional students, and I got high school students in the San Manuel Gateway College, all training in the same space. And the confluent training that provides up and down that list is powerful.
There's very few days when you leave your clinic at SACHS that you don't feel like you've had a real impact in someone's life. And that's a very powerful experience as an attending physician, and a wonderful training environment for our residents. I did not know that about Harvey Elder. So Dr. Elder, is legendary in these internal medicine walls that is where I call home. And what's pretty cool about that is when the San Bernardino campus opened, IED clinic and cardiology clinic happened in the same specialty pod. And so we sat side by side with each other. And I had no clue that he was one of the founding fathers, if you will, of that organization. That's amazing. Just candidly, did you, in your wildest dreams, ever think that SAC would turn into what we have at San Bernardino campus?
I had no expectation of that at all. It's just quite a journey to be on to watch this thing grow. And frankly, Anthony, as you know, for it to become such an essential part of our healthcare system. I mean, this is not just a community clinic for a few people that don't have health insurance. This has become an integral part of Loma Linda's network. They're seeing 150,000 patient visits a year down there now in the SAC network. So the impact it's having, fortunately, through what's called the FQHC, Federally Qualified Health Network reimbursement system, we get decent reimbursement for those people. So we can afford to expand that. And I appreciate you and all the others that not only do primary care, but now bring all the specialty care down to the SAC system as well.
I've heard tale, at least, that you really got your hands dirty with setting things up. And you really were instrumental in, installing toilets and making sure that the whole thing came together back then.
So that's why they leak. I was wondering.
That's why.
Is that true?
Well, there is some truth to that. When we took over the Norton Clinic in 1995, it had been empty for about a year or two. The Air Force had pulled out. And so when we moved in, it was dirty and everything. So my brother, Ken, and his wife, Dee, and Judy, and I, and a few of the local community people, we spent a week cleaning that building, cleaning toilets. One of my jobs to trap all the gophers in the yard out there. It had been overrun by gophers. That's one of my specialties. And so, yeah, there was some real truth to that, trying to get that thing ready to go.
That's an awesome story. One of the things that I've been impressed in working, side by side with you on a number of projects is that you seem to bring your A game almost every day, if not every day. There's a number of curveballs that are sometimes thrown into our organization, and you have to shift focus a little bit. And the question I have for you is, where do you recharge? We all have a passion for this place, what it stands for, and what we're trying to do with it. But we all still need a place to recharge our battery. And so I'm curious, in your own world, where do you find that? Where do you find that recharge?
I grew up in northern Idaho in a rural community. Though my father was a family doctor, I worked with all the farm kids there. So I grew up as a farm boy, and that's never left me. So we live up in Oak Glen, have a couple acres, and when I go home, there's always something to do. Mowing, pruning trees, tilling the garden, always trapping the gophers, always something to do. And that's my recharge. That plus hiking. We live by a place called Pisgah Peak. And when I head up Pisgah Peak, usually 2 or 3 times a week, there's very few problems I can't solve by the time I get to the top of Pisgah Peak. I may have labored with something all night long, but boy, when I get out there and get the endorphins flowing, why, it really clears your brain. So those are probably the 2 things that give me the recharge I need.
That's interesting. I find the same thing. We have several acres, and just a quick story. I laid all the the drip system, 7,000 feet of drip on 3 acres and planted every tree. Some lived, some died and had to replant. And so I remember about 7 years ago, I walked up the hill with a lemon in my hand. It was a Meyer lemon. It was the first lemon that I harvested. And I was very proud, my feathers were, sort of, and my wife, Tammy, says, well, that is the most expensive lemon ever harvested on the face of this earth. And I was just crushed because here I was like, I'm a man of the earth. Yeah. We can sustain out here. But it is a really nice place to, the pickaxe has done a lot of good for me from time to time, digging those trenches.
Yeah. And people say to me often, well, get some help. I mean, you hire some help. There's a lot of people. Why would I take away why do I pay somebody else to do what I want to do, what I enjoy doing? So no siree, man. I take care of that all myself and fixing sprinklers and doing all the stuff that goes into it. I've been the last 2 months rehabilitating my koi pond. I got a fairly large pond, 30 by 60 feet, that finally overgrew with water lilies and everything else. So I had to drain it, carry out all the gunk, repatch the holes. It has a rubber liner, so the bears get in there frequently, and when they crawl out, they claw the liner. It's had a lot of holes in the liner, so I've been in there patching all these holes, and finally, just 2 nights ago, got it refilled. So I got it looks good again.
Do you have koi in there now?
Yeah, well, we did. The ones we had died over all this, but now I'm in the process of restocking. Yeah.
Wow,
that's awesome.
That's just so amazing. I know you kind of have a persona here on campus, obviously as a farmer, as I know you've said is a passion of yours, but you almost have this Chuck Norris vibe to you, Dr. Hart. I mean, you go into very dangerous, and you've been to very dangerous countries to help people, and you battle bears and koi, and you pick up rattlesnakes with your bare hands. You've lived through several wildfires. Is there ever a time in your leadership here or other times where you've truly been scared, or is it those walks up to the top of the peak that help you kind of keep your faith and keep your head on?
There are times that I get worried. I'm not a worrier. I'm a basic optimist, but watching financial trends sometimes kind of scares me because it's kind of stuff outside of your control. But I've got such a fundamental faith in this place that it's here for destiny. It's not something that certainly myself or anybody else has built. It's just something that God has put in place, that He's enabled us to work at. So, I never walk away saying, my goodness, will we make it? I walk away saying, okay, what's going to happen next? But something's going to surface. And this recent thing we went through with COVID and the financial downturn and all the pressures, the economic downturn, the pressure on the university when students come back, we're bouncing back already. And it's just fun to watch the way that works out.
There are several, in my mind, very landmark stories in this institution's history where clearly there was divine intervention into guidance. I think about the 4 women who, when we were trying to decide if the institution should even remain, I think it was in the late 19 teens, and they said, when they're talking about the hospital down in Los Angeles, and they said, let the women of the church raise the funds necessary to build the hospital with one caveat. They get to name the hospital and, the White Memorial Hospital. Yeah. I mean, I think there are some stories that this is exactly what you describe. I mean, it's too much to be chance and coincidence.
Well, outside my main office here in McGann Hall we put up the Founders Plaza, and engraved in granite is the history of Loma Linda's first year. And not infrequently, I will go out and reread that story when I'm facing something. My goodness, go out and read that again. It's okay. If those guys stick their necks that far out, that had that much faith, surely we've got that today. Let's carry on. So yeah, it's some powerful stuff. Speaking of stories, Kelsey, Ben Siopko, who works for us now, a retired lab guy, that travels the world fixing lab for us, sent me some pictures the other day from Afghanistan. We ran a hospital out there in Kabul for some years, and I'd forgotten about these pictures. We had one picture of me standing on top of an Afghan army tank. We had been driving around Sabbath afternoon, came across these 2 guys washing their tanks in a river bottom. And so I'd got out, and you couldn't really chat with them, but I was talking, climbed up on the tank, just as the sergeant came along, and he was unhappy. We just about got thrown in jail for standing on his tank.
You put yourself in those situations every day, but do you feel like that is how you're able to have been such a successful leader? Is that you're out there and you're with the people?
Well, I mean, out there maybe. I am a risk taker. I mean, that's probably what you're referring to. I recognize that I tend to be more of a risk taker perhaps than I should. And I'll never forget a sign in the World Health Organization. I worked there some years ago, and said, if you do not make mistakes at least 25% of the time, you're not taking enough risks. And I think that's true. I mean, I think you have to take some risk, and when you do that, you'll make some mistakes. And I've certainly made some mistakes. We've made some mistakes. But I think that's what keeps Loma Linda vibrant, is that we're willing to push the edges and keep trying to make that happen.
Shifting gears just a little bit, I wanted to pick your brain on a few things. There's a lot of stuff in the world right now, and I use the term stuff intentionally because it's just there's a lot of different things going on. And I've at least appreciated that your notes from the president provides a platform for you to express your thoughts on some pretty hefty issues, and weighing a lot of different influences, and different organizations and things of that nature. And I'm really curious, one, when you're reflecting on what you're going to write about, how do you choose it? And I've just been pretty impressed at how provocative, your notes from the president really have been, whether it be from diversity, whether that be gender or race, sexual orientation, to the most recent one here, first part of October, about the role of a citizen in voting. I'd like you to share just a little bit of sort of the method that you use to get to the end of what you're trying to say.
That's not an easy process for me, because I enjoy thinking through and writing those notes myself. Kelsey's offered to do it for me, but I've turned her down. And so I usually try to pick an issue that's pertinent, then to the month, the time we are in. But then how do you articulate the right balance between what I would describe as a fairly conservative, faith-based organization with its baggage, if I can call it that, and all that's there, but also trying to lead our young people and our faculty to view the world in a broader way. And there's times when I get too far out and I get my chain yanked, and I get quite a few responses to every news notes I write. Most of them supportive, but every time there'll be a few that say, "You're off your rocker, man. Mm-hmm. I mean, you've got the wrong tack on this," and I accept that. I mean, I see Loma Linda as somehow having and it's a heavy responsibility to articulate a conservative, faith-based view of world trends, and how should we position ourselves. And life changes. I mean, I can tell you, my views on many of these issues changed dramatically from being a kid in Idaho, dramatically. But I think that's part of what a university is all about, is to be able to articulate and push that boundary in a positive way to help people look at issues in a fresh sort of perspective.
It's so interesting. There's not many leaders of an organization of our size that write their own communications, and you can tell when you read it that it's directly from your heart. And like Dr. Hilliard said, you've tackled some pretty hefty issues, and it's interesting to hear you say that it's difficult for you, because it does seem so easy.
Yeah. Once I decide an issue, then it flows fairly easily. But to try and decide what issue and trying to decide the right tack to take in that issue, why that's challenging sometimes.
So what is the thought, your last thought that you had when you were walking up Piscopee?
I didn't get to go up this morning because I had a Zoom conference board meeting with Ghana, the country of Ghana, this morning. That often happens, early morning meetings at 6:30. But I'm very pleased with where Loma Linda is at. And I, as you know, Anthony, I get to sit in too many committees. I call myself a professional committee member. That's basically what I do now. But watching the leaders across this campus, the give and take, the dialogue that happens. I mean, the journey we've been on for the last 10, 12 years towards one Loma Linda, to where we are finally having open dialogue between the clinical world, the hospital world, the university world, saying, this is not your problem, this is our problem. How do we work together to try to work that? That, I think, is one of the greatest things that we have been able to accomplish in the last decade. And I truly hope that it'll continue to bear fruit, because it is the only way we're going to survive in this current world. And it's so powerful to watch you, Anthony, as a leader in the faculty medical group, the hospital leadership, the others come together and say, okay, we're going to tackle this together. This is our issue. And that's very reassuring to me.
So for the record, you were on a Zoom call with Ghana, and then you went to clinic.
I did.
And you served patients, and then you came here.
I did, yes.
What was the diagnosis of your last patient?
Depression.
Mm.
Well, the very last one, no. The very last one was a elderly gentleman with fairly advanced type 2 diabetes who's still trying to keep his life in order and control his meds and still go on mission trips to the Philippines.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Boy, you know, your second to last patient, I guess, the depression, you know, that's mental health. Mental health awareness was this weekend, I believe, right?
Yep.
And, you know, I'd like to hear your thoughts on, you know, some of the challenges that Loma Linda is facing. You know, as you look through your crystal ball, which seems to be more clear than a lot of ours, over the next 5 years or so, what is the biggest challenge you think we're going to face?
Well, certainly the short-term challenge is opening our new hospital. I mean, we took a huge risk when we bought into this project, nearly $1.3 billion worth of hospital, trying to carefully put together a financial plan and so on, gambling on the economy, gambling on the patients, gambling on our doctors, would we have enough patients and so on. It looks like we're down that track successfully so far, and I trust we will continue to be. That's going to set the pattern for the next 50 years for Loma Linda. In terms of what we do, kind of who we are, and so on. It also raises expectations. It raises the bar. I mean, Loma Linda, you've planted your foot in the ground saying we are going to be the excellent place to come to in the Inland Empire. And I have full confidence that we'll be able to meet that goal. Education is changing dramatically, drifting towards hybrid education, we call it, online learning and all that means. We're looking seriously at establishing a number of branch campuses of Loma Linda at other places, so the students don't come here for their practical work. They can get it elsewhere. So there's many, many changes like that will take place over the next few years. We struggled yesterday with looking at the strategic plan. I mean, is this a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan? How far can we predict out where it needs to go? And those are big issues, but they're fun issues to tackle.
So, taking us back to farming, there was a rattlesnake incident a year or 2 or 3 years ago, and I don't need you to dwell on this, but it's had implications in our household. So I have a son, Max, who's 14, and he's had a very ripe and rich paranoia with snakes. And now it's really 2 steps forward, turn around. 2 steps forward, turn around. And I'm like, Max, what are you doing? I'm looking for the rattlesnake. And I'm like, you don't hear the rat. Oh, I hear them. Can't you hear them? And I say, well, they're not around. He goes, well, if the president of Loma Linda can get bit, so can I. So I'm looking for the rattlesnakes. But I was intrigued, and I wanted you to comment on this. I was intrigued that you tried to allow the rattlesnake to thrive in its environment the first time you saw it. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a biologist. I'm a naturalist, so I like to be at peace with the world around me. So we see rattlesnakes quite often. I usually don't want to kill them. They're useful to kill gophers and others. So I usually catch them and move them off the edge of the property and let them carry on. And that's what happened in this case. And obviously, as you've heard, why I didn't get quite close enough to its head, so it nailed me, and I got bumped in with 30 vials of antivenom. But yeah, no, I have a nice walnut tree in my front yard that is now producing walnuts, and I never get any. Between the gray squirrels and the chipmunks and the ravens and the bears, they all get my walnuts. So I told Judy the other day, let's don't think of this as a harvest for us. This is a harvest for nature. We're producing these for all these animals. Let them enjoy them, and let's just sweep up the mess afterwards. So I enjoy the nature around me and watching it and nurturing it.
What I really wanted to touch on is how did being a patient impact your thoughts as we are sort of shaping our healthcare world, both in a clinical environment with Zoom and some of these other things, and you being vulnerable as a patient in our medical center?
Well, this happened on a Sunday morning, and my wife wanted me to call a helicopter. No, let's get in the pickup and go. You can drive faster than a helicopter.
Unbelievable.
So we got down here, and she dropped me off in the front of the ED. I walked in, and they want to know my birth date and my so on, and so I was trying to get. I said, I got a rattlesnake bite here. I need. They finally okay, but they didn't know who I was, and I didn't say any more than Richard Hart. And then finally somebody goes, "This is Dr. Hart. Here, quick." So away it went from there. And I spent the night and then half the next day in the ED sleeping there, trying to sleep, getting poked multiple times and watching this thing. But we've got a good team. I mean, the quality of caring and compassion that you feel in our team, certainly ED, and then afterwards and all the aftercare that went on is significant. So we make mistakes, no question. Our ED is busy, no question. There's times when billing gets fouled up, when notes get fouled up, when things happen. I mean, no, without question. But I can tell you the quality of the staff that identify with Loma Linda's mission and say, we're part of this, we're here because of that, is palpable. And I certainly experienced that myself as I was experiencing being a patient for a while.
I still can't believe that you walked in on your own with a rattlesnake bite. That speaks so to who you are.
So we chose the name Evening Rounds for a reason. To me, Evening Rounds takes on a number of different meanings, and in part, depending on what you're doing on the day. There's been a number of days, both as a trainee and as an attending physician, where evening rounds is exactly what it implies. You're spending the night with a very sick patient. Often you're having very difficult end-of-life conversations in the evening because that's when family members get off of work and come in. And you have seen many sunsets in the evening. And those sunsets are in the hospital, and you're away from your family and your friends, and you miss birthdays and anniversaries and things like that. And never a time did I feel like I was in the wrong place. You felt like you were there doing something important. Evening rounds also, to me, is a time where I work on things that shape me as a human, whether it be exercising or with a headlamp, tilling soil, trying to find, the eggs that our chickens lay, things like that. I would like to hear from you when you hear the term evening rounds. What does it mean to you?
I mean, it's been some years since I've been an active clinician in the hospital going on rounds. But thinking back, morning rounds was always a time when you were hurrying, trying to get through everything, planning the day, ordering tests, reviewing lab stuff, and so on. But evening rounds was when you were a bit slower. You were kind of kicked back a bit, reflecting on the test, what happened, planning, looking into the future, reassuring patients, and so on. And so that term to me has always meant kind of a reflective time, where you step back a little bit and think about the day and think of what's gone on. I think the whole title of Evening Rounds is that combination of, we're still working, we're still thinking, we're still that, but we're also reflecting and remembering and looking back a bit on what's happened during that day. So, it's a delight to have this happening, Anthony, in the podcast, and letting our doctors share their perspectives in something like this, because you cannot be a good doctor unless you've got some fundamental compassion heart that takes you into the world of medicine, and I think that's what Loma Linda excels with our clinical staff.
Well, Dr. Hart, I can't thank you enough for spending the evening with us here on our Evening Rounds podcast. This is Anthony Hilliard, and from all of us here at Evening Rounds podcast, we thank you for joining us and have a great evening.